Thank you for joining our web seminar featuring Dr. Patricia Edwards and Dr. Susan Piazza. We appreciate your taking time out of your schedules to participate in this web seminar. Tonight's presentation, The Impact of Family and Literacy Development, Convergence, Controversy, and Instructional Implications, will discuss the importance of the family and the literacy support of children's learning. Please feel free to interact with both Dr. Edwards and Dr. Piazza's ideas throughout the seminar by typing in the chat area. Also, we are pleased that tonight's presentation will incorporate audio clips. However, you may hear echoing or reverberations at times. Thank you for your patience as we continue to improve your GCLR web seminar experience. Again, thank you for joining us tonight. While we are waiting for the presentation to begin, please feel free to log on to Facebook and like us. And if you have not already done so, please let us know in the chat area where you're joining us from. The presentation will begin in 4 minutes. Thank you for joining our web seminar featuring Dr. Patricia Edwards and Dr. Susan Piazza. We appreciate your taking time out of your schedules to participate in this web seminar. Tonight's presentation, The Impact of Family on Literacy Development, Convergence, Controversy, and Instructional Implications, will discuss the importance of the family in the literacy support of children's learning. Please feel free to interact with both Dr. Edwards and Dr. Piazza's ideas throughout the seminar by typing in the chat area. Also, we are pleased that tonight's presentation will incorporate audio clips. However, you may hear echoing or reverberations at times. Thank you for your patience as we continue to improve your GCLR web seminar experience. Again, thank you for joining us tonight. While we are waiting for the presentation to begin, please feel free to log on to Facebook and like us. If you have not already done so, please let us know where you're joining us from in the chat area. The presentation will begin in 2 minutes. Okay.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's Global Conversation in Literacy with Dr. Pat Edwards and Dr. Susan Piazza. I'm Christy Pace and I'm joined with Kelly Dozier, and we will be helping to moderate and host tonight's web seminar. Kim Waters was going to be here with us. She is also a student from Georgia State University, but she is having technical difficulties. Some of you are frequent GCLR webinar participants, and it's good to see you again. For those of you joining us for the first time, welcome. We are glad you are with us tonight. And your moderators for this evening are Peggy Albers and Dennis Odo, professors of language and literacy at Georgia State University in Atlanta, Georgia. And Kelly Dozier and myself will be helping to moderate, and we are also joined with David Brown and Tuba Anjay Crowder, They are also doc students at Georgia State University and part of our GCLR research team. Global Conversations in Literacy Research consists of online interactive web seminars with the intent to circulate cutting-edge research in the fields of literacy and language arts. GCLR currently seeks volunteers for a study on the nature of technology-mediated interactions within literacy-focused web seminars. If you are willing to participate in a brief interview, please type your email address into the chat area and a research team member will contact you within a few days to schedule an appointment. The collected data will provide important information for understanding the nature of web seminars to share scholarship across the world.
During tonight's web seminar, if you have any comments or questions, please type them into the chat box. Dr. Odo will monitor that area, and Dr. Edwards and Dr. Piazza will address these at the end of their presentation. We would love to know where you are participating from in tonight's web seminar, so please use the wand tool and click the location on the map. The wand tool has a little red flashy symbol and is located to the left of the PowerPoint presentation. Dr. Patricia Edwards is a distinguished professor of language and literacy in the Department of Teacher Education, a principal investigator at the Literacy Achievement Research Center, and a senior university outreach fellow at Michigan State University. Dr. Susan Piazza is an Associate Professor of Literacy Studies in the Department of Special Education and Literacy Studies at Western Michigan University. At this time, it is my honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Patricia Edwards and Dr. Susan Piazza in their presentation entitled The Impact of Family on Literacy Development, Convergence, Controversy, and Instructional Implications. Let's give them a virtual round of applause.
Okay, Pat, Susan, this is your moment. Pat, Susan, you want to go ahead and turn your mics on?
Hi, good evening, everyone. This is Susan Piazza. I'm just waiting for Dr. Edwards to start. She's going to begin our presentation. She might be having trouble with her mic.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, you can.
Okay, good evening. My name is Dr. Patricia Edwards. I'm a member of the Reading Hall of Fame and a distinguished professor of language and literacy in the Department of Teacher Education at Michigan State University. I served as a member of the International Reading Association's Board of Directors and later as president. Also, I served as president of the Literacy Research Association, formerly the National Reading Conference. I created 2 nationally acclaimed family literacy programs, Parents as Partners in Reading, a family literacy training program, and Talking Your Way to Literacy, a program to help non-reading parents prepare their children for reading. The book reading programs were designed to facilitate a fit between the parents' expectations
which is for their children to have a successful school experience, and the school's general expectations. Two expectations schools generally have for parents are that they read to their children and model literate behavior. The book reading programs were designed to meet these two expectations. Nearly 4 years ago, I led a people-to-people language and literacy delegation to China. Dr. Piazza was one of the delegates. We discovered at that time that we had some common professional interests and discussed the possibility of merging those interests. Since that time, Dr. Piazza and I have presented together and co-authored several publications. I'm proud to have the opportunity to co-present with her this evening.
Good evening. I'm Susan Piazza, Associate Professor of Literacy Studies at Western Michigan University and former Director of the McGinnis Reading Center and Clinic, which is where I've had the privilege of working with lots of different kinds of families. Before that, I worked in K-12 settings in Ontario, Canada, Detroit, Michigan, and now in Western Michigan. The literacy projects that I'm involved in focus on the intersection of literacy and power. And this will be one of our major themes tonight. One of my favorite projects in our reading center was a community-based program focused on families with an incarcerated member. Together with Dr. Lonnie Duncan from Counseling Psychology, we developed a strengths-based after-school program and partnered with families to support the academic achievement and social well-being of their school-aged children. I'm also excited to be in the beginning stages of planning for a new project with researcher and colleague Dr. Andrea Smith. This program will be based on the work of the National Research Center on Grandparents Raising Grandchildren, which happens to be a collaborative initiative between Georgia State University and Western Michigan University. So I'm also an active member in the Literacy Research Association, the International Reading Association, and the National Council of Teachers of English. As Dr. Edwards mentioned, we began our work together in 2009 after we met in China. That's when we discovered our shared interests in teacher preparation and culturally responsive pedagogy. My research has examined literacy issues related to how white, middle-class females specifically, but also how all teachers understand this notion of being responsive in classrooms and communities that might not mirror their own backgrounds. I really enjoy working with and learning from Dr. Edwards, and I'm honored to have this opportunity to share in this webinar with all of you from around the world tonight. Dr. Edwards, are you there?
Pat, if you would press the microphone in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen rather than up in the participant section, that will help you.
Oh, is it on now? There it is now. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
The importance of the family in the literacy support of their children's learning has been long recognized. Researchers have evidence for the positive effects of parent involvement on children and families. According to Henderson and Burla, the most accurate predictor of a student's achievement in school is not income or social status, but the extent to which that student's family is able to, 1, create a home environment that encourages learning, 2, express high but not unrealistic expectations for their children's achievement and future careers, and 3, become involved in their children's education at school and in the community. In addition to researchers studying the importance of families, over the years, researchers have also studied different approaches for involving families in the literacy development of their children. Even though there is general agreement within the research community regarding the importance of the family, there is disagreement among researchers about how to work with families. In this presentation, Dr. Piazza and I focus on the agreements and disagreements within the research community regarding how to work with families around literacy issues. Specifically, we highlight areas of convergence around the impact of the family on literacy development, define different courses of action for working with families, present support statements from researchers for each of the 3 courses of action, discuss key studies related to each of the 3 courses of action, pose challenges to the research community about working with families, highlight the voices of parents and teachers discussing their perspectives on how to work with families and children. And lastly, we look forward to engaging you during a question and answer period. We would like to acknowledge this evening that we have many colleagues in the field who conduct exemplary work on family literacy, but we're unable to include every colleague's work in this short presentation. Based upon our review of the literature on the impact of the family on literacy development, 3 areas of convergence emerged. First, norms, practices, and rules of participation differ in families. 2, parents play varying roles in children's literacy development. 3, transitions between the social context of the home and the school can present problems for some children. The 3 courses of action that individuals within the research community have decided to employ to work with families is a source of many hotly contested debates. In our examination of the literature, we found 3 courses of action, which we have categorized by drawing upon the framework of Wiley. These 3 courses of action are Accommodation, Incorporation, and Adaptation. At this time, Dr. Piazza will begin by discussing the first course of action, Accommodation. She will provide some examples of earlier research as well as some current examples representing this approach.
Okay, first, let's remember that we're using theoretical approaches as a way to situate family literacy practices. And it's also important to remember that what's tidy and clean in theory is hardly ever that way in real life. Using a theoretical framework, we'll attempt to share how the research community has dealt with family literacy practices over the last 20 years or so, and how these practices have started to converge more recently. First, I'll share some historical studies identified by Dr. Edwards' earlier research on accommodation approaches, and then share more current studies that continue in that tradition. So by definition, the accommodation approach accepts that literacy begins in homes rather than in schools. It emphasizes the need to better understand students' ways of communicating, especially when they differ from our own. When we acknowledge that all students are members of local communities with rich language and literacy practices, we become more aware of the historical, political, cultural, and economic factors that influence family literacy practices. This approach can do wonders to inform schools' engagement with families. Some examples of earlier research in this approach include Schmidt's ABCs of Cultural Understanding and Communication, which has been quite popular in helping pre-service teachers learn to communicate across cultures. The literacy activities in her model include the autobiography, biography, cross-cultural analysis, cultural self-analysis of differences, and a communication plan for connecting the home, school, and community. Schmidt later collaborated with Finkbeiner in the European Union to expand this model to include international approaches with family literacy. And then there's Allen and Labo's 2001 Photographs of Local Knowledge Sources, which was a project that used students' photographs and narratives to help teachers better understand families. These researchers met with teachers to discuss their insights as they learned about students' out-of-school lived experiences. And then Florio Roane's 2001 Future Teachers Autobiography Club, and also Fry and McKinney's 97 project. These both focused on what they referred to as ethnic autobiographies. They're considered excellent ways for teachers to learn about literacy and culture and identity in their own lives as well as from others. So, as you can see, the focus here in accommodation is on raising awareness in order to become more culturally competent with the intent to become more culturally responsive. Some of the more recent studies that follow in the accommodation tradition include Murillo, Fink, and Allen's 2012 study. These authors examined views of bilingual parents in order to find counter-narratives to the deficit theories that often influence general perceptions of English language learners. The family views are especially powerful in the communities near U.S.-Mexico borders and other regions with bilingual communities. These researchers argue that it's our responsibilities to learn with and from bilingual families. And then in 2012, Mormon and several other researchers from Nebraska, they studied parent involvement in family-school partnerships. They found that very few studies focused on relationships between families and schools. And then studies that focused on improving parent-teacher relationships were even more limited. In fact, only 14% of studies looked at relational outcomes, such as cooperative approaches across social, emotional, or academic domains. The most common outcome that was measured was the parent-child relationship, but less than 1% looked at bi-directional communication between educators and families. In 2001, Compton, Lilly, and Green published bedtime stories and book reports. These authors reveal how race, class, gender, and history influence literacy. Each chapter describes how parents are involved across various contexts, such as the home, school, church, and community. And for example, Tisha Lewis wrote a chapter on intergenerational meaning-making between a mother and son in digital spaces. She examined how technology mediates relationships and how multimodal interactions affect home literacy practices and potentially classroom learning. Next, we have Compton, Lilly, and Leander, who wrote Reading Time, The Literacy Lives of Urban Secondary Students and Their Families, which was published also in 2012. Their account features families' literacies that span generations, and they conducted in-depth longitudinal research to document how time influences social practices and family discourses. And in an earlier but related study, Maisha Fisher wrote Writing and Rhythm, Spoken Word Poetry in Urban Classrooms. She looked at how literacy instruction can include social and community practices using the medium of spoken word poetry. She focused on a community of Latino and African American students and documented how a language arts teacher integrated personal experiences as literary inspiration. And finally, Green and Anion in 2010 argued that educational systems, including policymakers, need to reconceptualize education reform because it can be so disconnected from larger structural systems that perpetuate inequities between the rich and poor. Gaps in academic achievement remain irresolvable without this kind of reconceptualization. So while these researchers are not talking specifically about family engagement, they are addressing the needs of families as embedded within their surrounding communities. So we're going to pepper the voices of parents, teachers, and students throughout our presentation tonight with the goal of bringing to life the research and theory we're sharing. This audio clip is from a 4th grade student who talks about her experiences when her teacher asks her to interview family members and share with her classmates. Okay, and then next we have a father who tells us how he feels about his role in supporting his child's learning to read. So, accommodation is all about studying the sociology of literacy achievement and acknowledging the sociocultural and economic factors that impact literacy. It requires a strengths-based view of families' literacies. There's a heavy emphasis in education on accommodation, and there's been an explosion of studies that address international and bilingual issues with a movement toward how these issues can inform our instruction. In other words, the field is doing a much better job of merging theory with practice, which segues into our next concept of incorporation. So, under incorporation, this approach requires that educators study community practices that are not typically valued by schools, and then we carefully and purposely incorporate them into daily instruction. It also requires surrendering a privileged position and positioning ourselves as learners when it comes to other ethnic groups. Some of the earlier studies in the incorporation approach include the Moll and Gonzalez 1993 study, which is well known for using families' funds of knowledge to inform curriculum and instruction. Home visits, interviews, and the qualitative study of students' lived experiences help teachers learn about funds of knowledge. They also suggest participation in study groups so that we can learn about multiple perspectives and to collaborate when building our curriculum. These practices have proven to build mutual trust between families and educators. And then Parator's 2001 study provided a detailed analysis of how teachers and parents from 8 of 12 case study families worked together to support the academic success of students. She puts an emphasis on opportunities to write about issues importance in families' personal lives. So, through personal narratives and dialogue journals, teachers are able to stay tuned in to the complexities of their students' lives. This back and forth dialogue helps teachers know and respond better to students' needs. Kyle, McIntyre, Miller, and Moore's research from '02 conceptualized classroom teaching in ways that also valued funds of knowledge. Their work with families was not an add-on to the curriculum, nor was it a short-term classroom project. They argued that by reaching out and connecting with families, teachers would have the knowledge needed to maximize student learning. And then when Dr. Edwards worked with Pleasance and Franklin back in '99, they collected early home literacy information through parent stories. They viewed parents as important resources on specific formative interactions that may influence their child's attitude towards school. These parent stories provided access to the socio-emotional and educational variables needed to consider when we design instruction. This approach encouraged parents to see their involvement in their child's education in positive ways. These are just some of the field's earlier studies. Now Dr. Edwards will provide some current examples of research that continue in this tradition of incorporation.
In a 2012 comprehensive review of the literature on family literacy research, Catherine Compton-Lilly, Rebecca Rogers, and Tisha Lewis argued for the need to make visible the underlying epistemologies of family literacy scholarship with regard to the nature of literacy, goals related to literacy learning, and the ways in which people become literate. We noticed in some of the current literature we reviewed that it may not have focused on developing family literacy programs, but we found the research very informative in giving us an insider perspective on the lives of diverse learners. Family literacy researchers can learn from Elizabeth Moji, Kristen Perry, and Wufang Li's work. They have provided insights for the out-of-school literacies that can inform instruction as well as the development of family literacy programs. For example, Moji's chapter titled Powerful Spaces, Tracing the Out-of-School Literacy Spaces of Latina and Latina Youth, provides an in-depth and postmodern look at how youth perceive the spaces in their everyday lives. She documents how material, spaces, and places reflect and influence the literacy identities. These are important considerations for teachers trying to understand and to be responsive to adolescents who have complex lives outside of schools that influence their performance in schools. Kristen Perry's work with Sudanese orphan refugees provided a powerful ethnographic account of how 3 young male participants used storytelling to develop and maintain their identities as they journeyed toward becoming educated in the U.S. This important work informs educators about issues, identities, literacy practices that would otherwise remain unknown to most due to the specialized nature of her work. In Wufang Li's 2007 book entitled Contested Literacies, Culturally Contested Literacies, America's Rainbow Underclass and Urban Schools, she argues that if students in urban schools are to succeed, educators and curriculum writers need to use students' home literacies as bridges to the concepts being taught in the curriculum that is so highly valued by educational institutions. Li's work with families from 3 different ethnic and racial backgrounds, which she terms Vietnamese, Sudanese, and economically disadvantaged white. Li concluded that ideas about utilizing home literacies is in a cultural pedagogy of the key concepts in literacy education. In our review of the literature, it was refreshing for us to see that researchers have begun to incorporate the voices, opinions, and cultures of families. This is an excellent step in the right direction. Swadana organized her home school community relations course around the question, how can I be a more powerful ally with families of children I teach? She begins with an activity called Parent Perspectives, which uses quotes from parents who differ by culture, language, gender, sexual orientation, family structure, religion, income, etc., and encourage students to say how they might feel if they were that parent. In her 2011 dissertation study, Oluni examined teacher and parent perspectives of early literacy learning to begin to document practices that are used to teach literacy to culturally and economically diverse kindergarten students. Through interviews with kindergarten teachers and classroom visits to collect observational data and artifact data, teachers were provided with an opportunity to articulate practices they believe have been effective in teaching early literacy skills. Teachers also provided the opportunity for parents to share their perspectives on early literacy learning, their connections with the school and teacher, and what home activities they believe have been most important in preparing their children for school-based learning. Next, you will hear a middle school teacher discussing her approaches to incorporating a wider range of family involvement. The last course of action, adaptation, has been hotly contested among researchers, especially concerning how diverse families should be involved in their children's literacy development and what they need to know to be effective partners in literacy. Adaptation involves the expectation that children and adults who are held to have substandard knowledge and skills to acculturate and learn to match or measure up to the norms of those who control the schools, institutions, and workplace. Supporters of this course of action have claimed that many poor minority and immigrant parents want to give their children linguistic, social, and cultural capital to deal in the marketplace of schools. I quote Reginald Clark, who offers insight into the problem by stating that very often parents don't know to which standards, methods, and content their school-age children should be exposed. Their sense of uncertainty, anxiety, and fear increases because they begin to perceive themselves as inadequate. They feel they should know how to respond to their child's out-of-school linguistic and social capital needs, and they feel increasingly frustrated at having failed due to their incomplete knowledge about how best to help their children learn increasingly complex school lessons. When schools fail to provide these parents with factual, empowering information and strategies for supporting their children's learning, the parents are even more likely to feel ambivalence as educators, end quote. Poor, minority, and immigrant parents want to give their children linguistic, social, and cultural capital to deal in the marketplace of schools. Their wanting to know represents the social construction of a new identity. The process could be seen as one of redefinition. A strong voice with a recurring message is Lisa Delpy's argument that all children need access to the discourse patterns, interaction styles, and spoken and written language codes, which will allow them success in the larger society. If we don't help children access the language of power, it tends to perpetuate the Great Divide. 3 highly recognized family literacy programs that represent the adaptation approach are the Kennan Family Literacy Model developed by Sharon Dolan of the National Center for Family Literacy, Project Flame developed by Flora Rodriguez-Brown and Tim Shanahan, professors at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and Parents as Partners in Reading, developed in Louisiana and published by me when I became a professor at Michigan State University. The criticisms of family literacy programs that educate, such as the 3 I just mentioned, include statements like, these programs promote blaming the victim. These programs imply that the homes of poor, minority, and immigrant children are lacking literacy. These programs do not recognize that literacy is not something which can be pasted onto family life. It is deeply embedded within it. These programs have perpetuated we know, you don't know dichotomy. I question these criticisms. Where have researchers' fears, doubts, reservations come from? What do researchers think these parents are being forced to read? Does evidence exist where researchers have interviewed parents who have attended these family literacy programs? Is it fair for researchers to insert their own personal feelings about parents participating in family literacy programs without highlighting parent voices, perceptions, and evaluations? Are researchers' fears, doubts, and reservations justified? In recent years, practitioners and researchers have continued to develop adaptation-style programs. However, they have become more cognizant of epistemological issues such as culture, class, race, gender, ethnic and linguistic diversity. Now I'm going to share with you a current example of an adaptation-style family literacy program. What really matters in family literacy? Phase 2 of a Saskatchewan-based inter-organizational research program is a current example. The program was highlighted
Pat, we seem to have lost your sound.
What really matters in family literacy, phase 2 of the Saskatchewan-based inter-organizational research program is a current example. The program was highlighted in a 2012 report organized by Linda Watson-Elam for the Saskatchewan Family Literacy Panel. Watson-Elam correctly noted that as family literacy programs plan supports for early literacy experiences, they consider the child and the family within the framework of the larger social environment that surrounds them. Equally important, they work to create literacy learning opportunities, both formal and informal, that are relevant, meaningful, and respectful of those environments, linguistic practices, and cultures. Watson-Elam listed several characteristics of what she calls a quality program. A quality program is developed using the resources and expertise already available in the community. A quality program is based on the culture and language of the participants in the community. This strengthens self-esteem and a sense of personal identity. A quality program is built on the needs and strengths of the participants. A quality program has widespread community support. This can be accomplished by developing partnerships with other groups and organizations in the community, allowing the program to share resources, experience, and information with others. A quality program welcomes all participants and treats everyone with respect and dignity. A quality program is flexible. Next, you will hear a 5th grade teacher offering some tough advice to parents. Clearly, she communicates the need to adapt to the notion of becoming a partner in their child's education. You will also hear another example from Jimmy Baca and Relea Corsett's book titled Adolescence on the Edge. They offer the voice of a 2nd grade teacher demonstrating her adaptation approach for supporting the school's expectations. Dr. Piazza will wrap up the review of research across all 3 courses of action: Accommodation, Incorporation, and Adaptation. We're pleased to note that current research demonstrates that the field is coalescing and blurring the lines across these 3 approaches. In particular, Dr. Piazza will highlight a program that exemplifies this convergence over time.
Susan, you might need to turn your mic on.
Hi, Patty, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I lost all audio, so I apologize. So, well, as we have reviewed some successful family literacy programs, we found one that exemplifies the convergence that we're suggesting. A Canadian program developed by Anderson and Morrison back in 2000 continues to evolve today. Parents as literacy supporters or PALS, was designed to support families' language and literacy learning while also being responsive to their social contextual needs. The developers honor families' funds of knowledge, and they refuse the deficit views of immigrant families. And they're also responsible and responsive when requests are made to facilitate learning new skills. One of their recent programs, called PALS in Immigrant Communities, or IPALS, was facilitated in the language of each community they served. They included languages such as Farsi, Karen, Mandarin, Punjabi, and Vietnamese. They also developed materials for Aboriginal communities in consultation with elders. What strikes me most is how respectful and responsive this program is to the social and cultural context of each community they work in. Yet, it seems that most families do seek out the knowledge and skills needed to support their children in the new country. One of their programs served a Vietnamese immigrant community near Vancouver. Family members expressed a need to improve their own language skills in English, so the program adjusted, as we often do in education, and they added ESL classes for the adults. Families tended to gravitate toward learning ways to support their children in the new setting. In response to these requests, the program eventually featured the use of technology, the internet, email, downloading newspapers, both for keeping up with their homeland in Vietnam as well as for navigating their needs in Canada. Typical sessions requested by the families included learning the alphabet, early mathematics, learning to read, early writing, and technology, or what the families referred to as computers. One Vietnamese mother shared her thoughts from the program. She said, "We are new immigrants to Canada and have been here for less than a year. As a result, we are very unfamiliar with the school systems here. Thanks to the IPALS program, we are able to understand the basis of schooling and the learning system Canada has to offer." Next, you'll hear the voice of an American teacher who experienced a similar approach while working in an orphanage in Uganda. She shares her experiences of learning to integrate various pieces of each culture into the work with families.
I started from working in an orphanage in Uganda, and they talked a lot about how they try to mix a lot of Western principles for raising kids and teaching kids, and also what the culture in Uganda is, and trying not to have it all one way, because like yeah, their kids are rich and their parents wouldn't be.
Okay, so as our conception of literacy and of families change, so too do our practices if we are truly responsive to the needs of families. As Dr. Edwards and I have discussed these theoretical approaches used by researchers, we've come to the conclusion that it's essential, and we feel almost inevitable, that the research community adopts a more integrated framework, one that blurs the lines between accommodation, incorporation, and adaptation. So we adapted Wiley's framework and created this new visual that represents that convergence of the three courses of action. So at the top left in the accommodation approach, remember that responsiveness to others is the foundation of working with families. But note, our suggestion in the bubble to the right indicates that there needs to be a greater emphasis on helping traditionally marginalized students gain access to power. This access to power is often gained along with the proficiency of critical, reading and writing, and mainstream literacies. In the middle at the left, Incorporation puts a strong emphasis on the funds of knowledge that families bring with them to school settings. This is a critical component that we won't discount. However, it needs to be balanced with the idea of border crossing and code switching. We are reminded of W.E.B. Du Bois' notion of the double consciousness, which is a reality that racially, ethnically, and linguistically diverse individuals must learn to navigate. At the bottom left, Adaptation emphasizes access to power because, as many of our informants testified, it is this access to power that provides a good life trajectory for their children. The evolution of this approach, we would argue, is that it has moved away from the deficit model to an unapologetic approach that demands a clear pathway to mainstream access to power, which will open doors to opportunity while also respecting and being responsive to the individual differences that everyone brings. Jeffrey Canada from the Harlem Children's Zone sums it up nicely in the following comments. He says, "I want to stress the commitment level that folks feel. They will do whatever is necessary. Commitment without competence will not produce the results you need."
We know what we need to do. Now it's up to the research community and policymakers to consider the integrated model that we proposed. We have enjoyed sharing this presentation with you and look forward to hearing your comments and questions, especially your thoughts on the integrated framework for culturally responsive family engagement.
Thank you very much for the excellent and thought-provoking presentation, Drs. Edwards and Piazza. I just have time for one question. There were numerous questions asked in the chat box throughout the course of the presentation, but one that really caught my eye, probably related to my own interests, was from Nicole Petit. She asked, what about parents who don't know how to read in any language, which is the case of many of the refugees that she works with? Can they still contribute to their children's literacy development? Well, they can still contribute, but are teachers aware of how they can contribute?
I do think, this is Pat Edwards, I created a program called Talking Your Way to Literacy, a program to help non-reading parents prepare their kids for reading. I do think that non-reading parents can share with teachers orally their perceptions of what they know about their children's learning background, and that would at least engage those parents and give them the opportunity to participate in a meaningful way with the teacher and on behalf of their children.
Oh, thank you very much. That's great. Dr. Albers, do I have time for one more question?
Yes, you do.
Okay, so one more question that came up I thought might be interesting. There was an interesting discussion about this. This concept, it started with Barbara Gilpin. She talked about one of the video clips of the father working with his child, and he said he works hard all day. And she said it generated a question about the perception of reading as work or effort as opposed to a relaxing activity. And she wondered about what perceptions about reading are. And some find that reading is a relaxation, and she wonders, I guess, maybe what your thoughts are related to that.
Susan, you want to try that question?
Hello, I'm sorry, I'm having audio and video difficulty. Could you repeat that question?
Certainly. It comes from Barbara Gilpin. She says she was wondering about one of the audio clips of the father who said that after work he just wants to relax and he doesn't have time to read with his child, although he identifies himself as literate. It generated the question for her about the perception of reading as work or effort as opposed to a kind of relaxing activity. And she kind of wondered about that, and I guess I would like to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Here we go. Okay, audio on. I enjoyed that. I was paying attention to the chat screen during that part of the discussion, and lots of people were chiming in about, is that a cultural issue, or is it simply just different ways that families view relaxation or recreation? And I tend to think that it's more a social practice. I happen to have one child that does see reading as recreational and relaxing, and the other sees it as work and prefers not to do that. However, you know, that's the traditional version of literacy, but what about all of the other kinds of literacies they're engaged in? I think we have to be careful about narrow definitions, too, of reading.
Great. Thank you very much.